Wounded human warrior was meant to be sacrificed, but the alien prophetess had other plans. The ropes bit into Kane Trenton's wrists as he hung suspended from the ancient stone archway, his muscular form barely covered by the translucent fabric wrapped around his hips. Blood trickled down his chest from various battle wounds, but his eyes remained defiant. The alien village sprawled before him, a collection of crystalline structures that caught the twin sun's light in mesmerizing patterns. "Quite the predicament you've gotten yourself into, soldier boy," he muttered to himself, flexing his arms against the bindings. The movement sent fresh waves of pain through his shoulder, reminding him of the plasma blast that had taken him down during the skirmish with the hegemony forces. The scavengers had found him half dead on the battlefield. These violet-skinned humanoids were known for collecting anything of value after conflicts, including wounded warriors. At first, he thought they might treat his injuries, maybe even help him get back to his unit. That hope died when he saw the altar. A commotion drew his attention to a group approaching the archway. Leading them was a striking female figure that made his breath catch. Her pale lavender skin seemed to shimmer in the dying light. Long violet hair flowing like liquid starlight around her shoulders. The black corset she wore, adorned with gold accents and strategic cutouts, left little to the imagination. A brown wrap with high slits swayed around her legs as she moved, a golden dagger glinting at her hip. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a spark of recognition, perhaps. She paused, studying him with an intensity that made his skin tingle. "The offering appears strong," one of the male elders declared, circling Kane like a predator. "The goddess will be pleased." The woman, clearly some sort of priestess, stepped closer. Her fingers traced the air near his chest, not quite touching. "Indeed," she murmured, but there was something in her tone that made Kane pay attention. "We should prepare him properly. I will oversee this myself." The elders nodded in deference and departed, leaving them alone. The moment they were out of earshot, she leaned in close, her breath warm against his ear. "Don't let your guard down when they release you," she whispered. "The food they bring, it's not meant to sustain you." Kane turned his head slightly, their faces inches apart. "They're going to kill me, aren't they?" "Worse," she replied, her fingers now actually brushing his chest, sending unexpected shivers through him. "They plan to sacrifice you to the goddess, but She hesitated, those remarkable eyes searching his. "I have other plans." "I'm all ears, beautiful," Kane murmured, managing a roguish grin despite his predicament. "Though I have to admit, being tied up by a gorgeous woman isn't usually this complicated." A slight smile tugged at her lips. "I'm Lethea, and if you want to live, you'll need to trust me completely." "Kane Trenton," he replied, "and trust is a bit difficult when I'm hanging here like a side of beef." "The ceremony begins at moonrise," Lethea explained, her hands moving to adjust his bindings, loosening them just enough to ease the strain without being noticeable. "When they bring you down, they'll expect you to be weakened by the sacred herbs in the food. Play along. And then I'll convince them the goddess has other plans for you." Her eyes glinted mischievously. "I am her voice, after all." Hours passed like molten metal, slow and burning. As promised, they brought him down and offered food, which he pretended to eat while actually disposing of it when no one was looking. The drugs in his system from his injuries made it easy to appear dazed and compliant. When moonrise came, they led him to a circular platform beneath a massive crystal spire. Drums began to beat, their rhythm matching his heartbeat. Lethea appeared, now adorned with additional ceremonial jewelry that caught the moonlight. She began to dance, her movements hypnotic and sensual, drawing all eyes to her. Suddenly she stopped, throwing her head back with a gasp. "The goddess speaks!" she cried out. She accepts our offering, but not in the way we intended." The crowd murmured as Lethea approached Kane, her eyes blazing with conviction. "The goddess wishes this warrior to live. She has shown me visions. He is meant for greater purpose." "But the sacrifice," one elder began. "Has been accepted spiritually," Lethea cut him off. "His blood has already been spilled in battle. The goddess demands he serve her through me." The performance was masterful. Kane watched in amazement as she wove a tale of divine intervention so convincing that even the most skeptical elders nodded in acceptance. Within hours, he found himself in Lethea's private chambers, his wounds properly treated. That was quite a show, he said as she applied healing salve to his shoulder. The best lies contain truth, she replied softly. I did have a vision about you, just not the one I told them. Oh, he caught her hand, his thumb brushing her wrist. And what did you really see? Her eyes met his, filled with both mischief and something deeper. That's still unfolding. Lithia's private chambers were a fascinating blend of Alian architecture and personal touches. Crystal formations grew naturally from the walls, refracting the morning light into rainbow patterns across the floor. Kane, now dressed in loose-fitting local garments that complemented his muscular frame, found himself studying a wall covered in strange symbols. Those are prayer glyphs, Lithia explained, approaching from behind. She'd changed into a more casual outfit, though casual for her still meant a form-fitting violet dress with strategic cutouts that made Kane's pulse quicken. Each one represents a different aspect of our goddess. And which one represent us saving handsome human warriors? He asked with a roguish grin. She traced one symbol with a delicate finger. This one means destiny unwritten. Rather fitting, don't you think? Their eyes met, and that now familiar spark crackled between them. Kane had to remind himself to breathe. So what's the plan? I doubt your people will accept their priestess keeping a pet human indefinitely. Pet? Lithia arched an eyebrow, her lips curving in amusement. Is that what you think you are? Well, you did claim divine right over me, he reminded her, taking a step closer. Though I have to admit, I've never been anyone's divine mandate before. Then you're in for quite an education. She moved to a carved chest, retrieving several items. First lesson, our customs regarding chosen ones. The way she said those last words made his skin tingle. I'm listening. In our culture, when the goddess chooses someone, they must be properly initiated. She approached him with what looked like body paint in various shimmering colors, stripped to the waist. Kane complied, trying to ignore how her gaze lingered on his chest. I'm getting the feeling this initiation isn't in any official religious text. The best traditions rarely are, she replied, dipping her fingers in the paint. Hold still. The paint was cool against his skin, but Lithia's touch was warm. She worked with deliberate slowness, tracing ancient symbols across his chest and shoulders. Each stroke of her fingers sent shivers through him that had nothing to do with the temperature. These marks identify you as blessed by the goddess, she explained, her voice husky. They also mark you as under my personal protection. Personal protection sounds promising, Kane murmured, fighting the urge to pull her closer. What other customs should I know about? Well, she continued, adding a swirl of gold paint across his collarbone. Chosen ones traditionally learn our sacred dances. Dancing? I should warn you, I have 2 left feet. Her laugh was musical. Somehow I doubt that. Besides, these dances are more about connection than technique. To demonstrate, she took his hands and positioned them on her waist. The fabric of her dress was impossibly soft beneath his fingers. She began to move, guiding him in a slow, intimate pattern that seemed to make the very air around them pulse with energy. This is a prayer dance, she whispered, their bodies moving in perfect synchronization. It's meant to align 2 souls with the goddess's will. Is that what we're doing, aligning our souls? His voice was rough with barely contained desire. Among other things, her eyes held mischief and promise. There are many aspects of our culture you'll need to experience. They continued dancing, the movement becoming more fluid as Kane caught onto the rhythm. The painted symbols on his chest began to glow faintly, responding to their synchronized motion. That's new, he observed, watching the pattern shimmer. The paint is infused with crystal essence, Lithia explained. It responds to heightened emotions. Is that why it's glowing brighter where you touch me? Her fingers traced one particularly luminescent symbol over his heart. Perhaps it's responding to your natural energy. Humans are fascinating creatures. Says the woman who can make paint glow with a touch. Their dance had brought them to a stop near a window overlooking the crystal city. The twin suns were setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold that complemented Lithia's skin perfectly. There's something else you should know, she said, her expression growing serious. The marks I've painted, they're more than decoration. They're a claim. A claim? In our culture, when a priestess marks someone this way, It means, she hesitated, then continued, it means she's chosen them as her potential mate. Kane's heart skipped a beat. Is that what you want? What I want, she replied, moving impossibly closer, is to explore every fascinating aspect of you, Kane Trenton, starting with how well you handle our other customs. The rest of the evening was spent learning those customs, everything from proper meditation postures, which proved challenging with Lithia's hands-on teaching approach, to the correct way to address various tribal elders, made more difficult by her distracting proximity as she corrected his pronunciation. As night fell, Lithia insisted on performing a cleansing ritual that involved her feeding him exotic fruits by hand. Each piece was accompanied by an explanation of its religious significance, though Kane found it hard to focus on the lessons with her fingers brushing his lips. The trouble began at dawn. Elder Moran, the most traditionalist of the tribal council, noticed the unusual brilliance of Kane's ritual markings during morning prayers. The symbols hadn't faded as they should have. Instead, they pulsed with an intensity that matched his heartbeat. This is unprecedented, Moran declared, his ancient eyes narrowing with suspicion. High Priestess, explain this anomaly. Lithia stood before the council in her ceremonial attire, more elaborate than usual, a flowing silver robe that caught the light of the rising suns. The goddess works in mysterious ways, Elder. The human's unique energy interacts with our sacred pigments in unexpected ways. Or perhaps, Moran suggested, there are other forces at work here. Kane watched the exchange from his position at Lithia's side, acutely aware of how his bare chest's glowing markings betrayed his heightened emotional state. Each time Lithia moved near him, the symbols flared brighter. A test, then, Moran proposed. If truly blessed, let them complete the ritual of unity before the entire tribe. Lithia's composure slipped for just a moment. The ritual of unity. But that's sacred, ancient, and impossible to fake, Moran finished with satisfaction. Tonight, at the Temple of Crystalline Truth. After the council dispersed, Lithia pulled Kane into a private alcove. This complicates things, she whispered, her fingers absently tracing the glowing patterns on his chest. What exactly is this ritual of unity? Kane asked, catching her hand and holding it against his heart. It's intimate, she replied, her lavender skin flushing a deeper shade. Traditionally performed between a priestess and her chosen mate to prove their spiritual connection, the entire tribe witnesses the initial ceremony, though not the completion. Completion? Kane's voice roughened as understanding dawned. The ritual requires complete spiritual and physical unity, she explained, her eyes meeting his with unmistakable desire. Our people believe true mates share a unique energy signature. The ceremonial crystals respond only to genuine connection. And if we fail, they'll know I lied about the goddess's wishes. Her fingers splayed across his chest. But that's not what concerns me. What does? How strongly I want to succeed. The admission hung between them, electric with possibility. Kane pulled her closer, the markings on his chest blazing so bright they cast shadows on the walls. Then teach me what I need to know. The hours before the ceremony passed in a blur of preparation. Lithia instructed Kane in the ritual movements, each practice session charged with growing tension. Their bodies moved in perfect synchronization, the air around them seeming to crackle with energy. As dusk approached, Lithia applied fresh markings to his skin, different patterns this time, more intricate and intimate. These symbols represent eternal bonds, she explained, her touch lingering. They're meant to align our energies. Is that what's happening? Kane asked, watching as the patterns began to glow the moment they dried. Because something is definitely aligning. Her laugh was breathless. The intensity of your response? It's remarkable. Humans aren't supposed to be able to channel our sacred energies this way. Maybe your goddess really does have plans for us. The Temple of Crystalline Truth lived up to its name. Massive crystal formations created natural architecture, their facets reflecting and amplifying every light source. The entire tribe gathered in concentric circles around a central platform where crystal pillars formed a perfect octagon. Lithia led Kane to the center, both of them dressed in ceremonial robes that seemed designed to be removed in specific ritual patterns. The assembled crowd hummed with anticipation as Elder Moran began the invocation. "Let the ritual of unity commence," he intoned. "May the goddess reveal true bonds from false claims." What followed was the most intense experience of Kane's life. Each movement was choreographed, yet felt utterly natural, as if his body had always known this dance. The crystals around them began to respond, glowing faintly at first, then with increasing brightness. When Lithia's hands met his, energy surged between them. The markings on his chest flared like captured starlight, matching perfectly with similar patterns that had appeared spontaneously on her skin. Gas erupted from the crowd as the crystal pillars began to pulse in harmony with their joined energy. "Impossible," Elder Moran whispered, but it wasn't over. As the ritual reached its apex, the entire temple began to resonate. Light poured from the crystal formations, bathing everything in rainbow radiance, and in that light, something profound and permanent shifted between Kane and Lithia. The formal ceremony concluded with them kneeling together at the center of the platform, their foreheads touching, breathing in perfect synchronization as the crystal light slowly faded. The tribe erupted in celebration. Even Elder Moran looked stunned into acceptance. Later, in the privacy of Lithia's chambers, they completed what the ritual had begun. Their connection, already profound, deepened into something that transcended physical boundaries. The markings on their skin danced with light, their energies intertwining until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. Weeks after the ritual of unity, Kane awoke to find the markings on his chest had become permanent, shimmering beneath his skin like liquid starlight. More surprisingly, his fingertips now emitted a faint glow when he touched the crystal formations in Lithia's chambers. "It's unprecedented," Lithia marveled, watching him trace patterns of light across a crystal wall. "The sacred energies aren't just responding to you, they're becoming part of you." "And you?" Kane turned to her, noting how her lavender skin seemed to shimmer with an inner radiance that matched his own. "You're changing too." She moved closer, her bare feet silent on the crystal floor. The simple silk robe she wore caught the light from their glowing skin, creating dancing patterns. "My connection to the goddess has deepened, but there's something else." Kane pulled her into his arms, feeling the now familiar surge of energy between them. "Tell me." "I can sense your thoughts sometimes," she admitted, pressing her palm against his marked chest. "Not words exactly, but emotions, intentions. It's strongest when we're together," he finished, his voice rough with desire. The markings on his chest flared brighter in response to her touch. "Yes." Her eyes met his, filled with wonder and heat. "The elders say such bonds were common in ancient times, when our people first received the goddess's blessing. But between a human and one of us, never." Their lips met, and the crystal formations around them hummed in harmony with their shared energy. Every touch between them now carried an extra dimension of sensation, as if their very souls were caressing. Later, as they lay entwined in her bed, Lithia traced the glowing patterns on his chest with careful fingers. "There's something else," she whispered. "Something wonderful and terrifying." Kane caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "What is it?" "I'm with child." The words fell between them like drops of starlight. "Your child." Kane sat up, staring at her in wonder. "But is that even possible? Apparently, with enough divine intervention, anything is." Her free hand moved to her abdomen where the faintest shimmer of new markings was beginning to appear. "The goddess truly did have plans for us. Are you happy about this?" He searched her face, his heart pounding. Her smile was radiant, scared, excited, overwhelmed, but yes, incredibly happy. She guided his hand to her stomach, where he could feel a subtle warmth pulsing in rhythm with their shared energy. "Our people have legends about star-crossed lovers whose union was blessed by the goddess. Their children were said to possess remarkable gifts. Well, considering how their parents can make crystals sing and glow just by touching, I'd say remarkable gifts run in the family." His attempt at humor was somewhat undermined by the awe in his voice. A knock at the chamber door interrupted their moment. Elder Moran's voice carried through the crystal. "High Priestess, we must speak." "There are concerns," Lithia sighed, reaching for more formal attire. "They've noticed the changes in both of us. Some are frightened by how quickly you've adapted to our sacred energies." "And how do you feel about it?" Kane asked, helping her with the intricate fastenings of her ceremonial robe. I feel like the goddess knew exactly what she was doing when she brought you to us. She turned in his arms, her expression serious. But Cain, there's something else you should know. The changes happening to both of us, they're permanent, and they're still progressing. What do you mean? The markings are spreading. Soon they'll cover both of us completely, and the connection between us, it's growing stronger every day. Soon we won't be able to hide anything from each other, even if we wanted to. Good thing I don't have any secrets from you then, he murmured, pulling her close for one more kiss before they faced the elders. The council chamber was filled with nervous energy when they arrived. The crystal pillars seemed to pulse in response to their presence, creating ripples of light that danced across the worried faces of the assembled elders. High Priestess, Moran began, his voice carefully neutral. We've observed unprecedented developments. Yes, Lethea replied simply, standing tall beside Cain. The goddess's blessing continues to manifest in ways none of us could have predicted. And the child, another elder asked, we can sense its energy already. It's unlike anything in our records. Cain stepped forward, his markings glowing with protective intensity. The child is a gift from your goddess. Isn't that enough? The chamber fell silent as the crystals around them began to hum in harmony with his words. Even Elder Moran looked shaken by this display of power. There are ancient prophecy, Ishwanida, a female elder, spoke up hesitantly, about a union that would bridge worlds and bring forth a new age. We never imagined that it would involve a human? Cain finished, unable to keep a hint of challenge from his voice. That it would happen in our lifetime, she corrected gently. Deep within the Temple of Crystalline Truth, in a chamber so ancient its walls had grown smooth with time, Elder Amara unrolled a scroll that seemed to be made of crystallized light. Cain watched in fascination as the characters shifted and danced across its surface, responding to the glow emanating from his skin. The prophecy of starborn unity, Amara translated, her aged fingers trembling as they traced the luminous text. Written when our people first received the goddess's blessing, it speaks of a time when the stars themselves would choose a mate for one of our highest priestesses. Lethea stood beside Cain, her ceremonial robes doing little to hide the gentle swell of her pregnancy. The markings on her abdomen had spread into an intricate constellation pattern that pulsed with their child's heartbeat. The union of sky and crystal, Amara continued, shall bring forth a child of two worlds, whose very existence will bridge the void between flesh and spirit. That's rather poetic, Cain commented, trying to mask his unease with humor. But what does it actually mean for our child? It means, Elder Moran interjected from the shadows, that your offspring will possess powers beyond our comprehension. The prophecy speaks of abilities that even our most gifted priests could only dream of. Lethea's hand found Cain's, their shared energy creating a soft aurora around them. Is there more? Amara nodded, her eyes never leaving the scroll. The child will be both beacon and shield, drawing others to our light while protecting us from the darkness that follows. But she hesitated. But what? Cain pressed, feeling Lethea's anxieties spike through their bond. There will be those who fear such power. The prophecy warns of forces that would seek to prevent this union, or failing that, to control its outcome. Cain pulled Lethea closer, his protective instincts flaring along with the markings on his chest. Let them try. Later in their private chambers, Lethea paced restlessly while Cain watched from their bed. The crystal walls seemed to pulse in rhythm with her agitation. A beacon and a shield, she mused, her hand absently caressing her growing belly. Our child will never know a normal life. Cain caught her hand, pulling her down beside him. Normal is overrated. Look at us. I was supposed to be your sacrifice, remember? Instead, I became your mate. She laughed despite her worry, the sound making the crystals around them chime softly. The goddess certainly has a sense of humor. Speaking of which, he murmured, drawing her closer, have you noticed how the crystals respond differently when we're together? Her lavender skin flushed darker. I've noticed. The elders say our intimate moments are actually strengthening the sacred energy fields around the temple. Is that why they've stopped complaining about the light shows? Cain, but she was laughing again, her body relaxing against his. The markings on their skin began to glow in harmony, creating patterns that danced across the crystal walls. Their moment of peace was interrupted by a sudden surge of energy that rippled through the chamber. Lithia gasped, both hands flying to her abdomen. "What is it? What's wrong?" Kane asked, panic edging his voice. "Nothing's wrong," she assured him, wonder filling her face. "The baby, I think it's trying to communicate." Kane placed his hand over hers and immediately felt it, a presence in their shared consciousness, small but distinct. Images flooded their minds, stars wheeling overhead, crystal spires reaching toward them, and a sense of purpose so strong it took their breath away. "Well," Kane managed after a moment, "I guess the prophecy wasn't exaggerating about the power's part." Lithia turned to him, her eyes shining with tears and laughter. "Our child isn't even born yet, and already it's showing off. Definitely takes after its father. Yeah, hey, I'm not the one who can make crystal walls sing." Their playful banter was interrupted by another surge of energy, this one accompanied by a vision so clear it seemed to overlay reality. They saw their child, not as an infant, but as a young adult, standing at the center of a vast crystal amphitheater. Power radiated from their offspring's form, bringing harmony to chaos, healing to hurt, and understanding to conflict. "Is this a possible future?" Kane wondered aloud. "It's a promised one," Lithia replied with certainty, "but the path to it won't be easy," he finished. "But then, nothing worth doing ever is." She turned in his arms, her expression serious despite the intimate position. "Are you afraid?" "Terrified," he admitted, "but also excited, proud, and completely, utterly in love with both of you." The crystal walls hummed with the truth of his words, and their child's presence in their minds radiated contentment. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, not just as mates, but as family. In the deepest chamber of the temple, where ancient crystals pulsed with primordial energy, Kane stood shirtless, his marked skin gleaming with sweat. Elder Amara circled him, her wizened hands gesturing as she spoke. "The energy must flow like water," she instructed, "but strike like lightning. Your human physiology gives you unique advantages. Your people's natural resilience combined with our sacred powers creates possibilities we've never seen before." Lithia watched from a crystalline bench, her swollen belly now prominently displaying constellation-like patterns. Their unborn child's presence hummed in both their minds, absorbing every lesson with keen interest. "Again," Mara commanded, "channel the energy through the primary meridians, just as you do during your intimate moments with the High Priestess." Kane couldn't help but smirk. "Is that your subtle way of saying our bedroom activities have been good practice?" "Kane," Lithia scolded, but her amusement flickered through their bond. "Actually, yes," Amara replied, unperturbed. "The sacred union between mates is the purest form of energy manipulation. Your natural enthusiasm for such activities has accelerated your training considerably." The crystal walls seemed to blush with remembered passion, and Kane felt Lithia's embarrassment and desire ripple through their connection. Their child responded with a pulse of curious energy that made all the crystals in the chamber chime simultaneously. "Focus," Amara reminded them. "Your child's powers grow daily. You must be prepared to handle them." Kane closed his eyes, concentrating on the energy flowing through his marked skin. The patterns had spread further, now covering most of his torso and beginning to spiral down his arms. Each mark represented a different channel for the sacred power, forming a complex network that mirrored the crystal formations around them. "That's it," Amara encouraged as light began to dance between his fingertips. "Now reach for Lithia's energy. Let it complement yours." Their powers merged with practiced ease, creating a swirling aurora that filled the chamber. Their child's presence joined the confluence, adding a new dimension to their shared energy that made the very air sparkle with possibility. "Remarkable," Amara breathed. "In all our recorded history, no one has achieved such harmony so quickly." "Well," Kane grinned, maintaining the energy flow while opening his eyes, "I've always been a quick study when properly motivated." Lithia's answering laugh sent pleasurable ripples through their connection, making the crystal formations pulse in response. Their child's energy signature flared playfully, creating tiny rainbow cascades in the air. "Your child already shows more control than many adult practitioners," Amara observed. "The prophecy spoke true. This union brings forth powers beyond our understanding. Later, in their private chambers, Cain helped Lethea apply sacred oils to her growing belly. The elaborate ritual had become their nightly routine, strengthening both their bond and their connection to their unborn child. "You're getting stronger," Lethea murmured as his hands traced the glowing patterns on her skin. "The elders can't believe how quickly you're mastering techniques that take our people years to learn." "I have excellent motivation," he replied, letting his fingers linger on a particularly sensitive marking. The energy between them surged, making them both gasp. "Plus, I think our little one is helping." As if in response, their child's consciousness brushed against theirs, projecting images of crystal spires reaching toward stars, of energy flowing like rivers of light. The vision was clearer than ever before, filled with an understanding that seemed impossible for an unborn mind. "It's teaching us," Lethea realized, wonder filling her voice. "All these training sessions, our child is showing us how to prepare for its arrival." Cain paused in his ministrations, considering this. "That's both amazing and slightly terrifying. Our baby isn't even born yet, and it's already smarter than both of us." "Definitely takes after its mother," Lethea teased, then gasped as another surge of energy coursed through her. "Oh, that was a strong one." Cain placed both hands on her belly, letting his newly trained senses explore the power flowing through her. "The baby's energy is becoming more focused, more intentional." Their child's presence filled their minds again, this time projecting a series of complex energy patterns. Training exercises more advanced than anything Amar had shown them. "Well," Cain laughed, "I guess we know what tomorrow's lesson plan will be." Lethea covered his hands with hers, their combined energy creating a protective cocoon of light around them. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Being captured, almost sacrificed, bound to an alien priestess and her impossibly powerful unborn child?" Cain turned her in his arms, pressing his forehead to hers in the intimate gesture they'd shared since their first ritual. "Best failed sacrifice ever," he murmured against her lips. The crystal walls hummed with the truth of his words, their shared laughter echoing through the sacred chambers as their energy danced together in perfect harmony. The training exercise seemed simple enough. Cain and Lethea would combine their energies to create a protective sphere around themselves, a technique they'd need to shield their powerful child once it was born. They'd performed similar feats dozens of times before, but today was different. "Remember," Elder Amara cautioned, "your child's energy will be part of the equation. Be prepared for unexpected variables." Cain stood behind Lethea, his chest pressed against her back, their marked skin glowing in harmony. Her pregnancy had advanced enough that their child's energy signature was now a constant presence, like a third heartbeat pulsing through their bond. "Ready?" he whispered against her ear, feeling her shiver in response. "Always," she replied, leaning into his embrace. They began the familiar dance of power, their energies intertwining like lovers' caresses. The crystal chamber hummed in resonance as their combined force field began to take shape around them. Everything was proceeding normally until their child decided to join in. The surge of power was unprecedented. What should have been a gentle merger of energies became a tsunami of force that exploded outward, shattering smaller crystals and sending Elder Amara diving for cover. "Control it!" she shouted from behind a pillar. But control seemed impossible. Their child's energy had amplified their own powers exponentially, creating a maelstrom of sacred force that threatened to tear the chamber apart. Worse, they couldn't break the connection. Their three-way bond had become a feedback loop of escalating power. "Cain!" Lethea gasped, her knees buckling. He held her tighter, feeling her struggle to contain the overwhelming energy. Their child's consciousness brushed against theirs, radiating not fear but excitement. It was playing, experimenting with its powers like a toddler discovering its strength. Unfortunately, that strength could level the temple if they didn't get it under control. "Remember the night of the unity ritual?" Cain whispered urgently in Lethea's ear. "How we channeled our energy into passion instead of power." Understanding flowed through their bond. Together, they began shifting the wild energy away from raw force and into something more intimate. The destructive maelstrom transformed into waves of pleasure that rippled through the crystal formations, making them sing with harmonic resonance instead of cracking under pressure. Their child's presence in their minds turned curious, then playful, its energy falling into rhythm with their own more controlled flow. The crisis passed, leaving them breathing heavily in each other's arms while the crystal chamber filled with softly pulsing light. "Well," Elder Amara remarked, emerging from behind her pillar with remarkable dignity, "that was certainly educational." Later, in the privacy of their chambers, Cain helped Lethea into a bath of healing crystals. The afternoon's power surge had left them both physically and emotionally drained. "Our little one has quite the sense of humor," he commented, watching the water shimmer with residual energy. Lethea agreed, her head resting against his chest as he sat behind her in the large crystal tub. "Taking after its father already. Hey, I'm not the one who thought it would be fun to nearly bring down the temple." Their child's consciousness rippled with amusement at their banter, sending tiny waves across the bath's surface. "We'll need to be more careful," Lethea mused, tracing patterns in the glowing water. "The baby's powers are growing faster than anyone anticipated." "Good thing we discovered a way to channel that excess energy," Cain replied, his hands sliding over her shoulders in a way that made their shared markings pulse with renewed vigor. "Cain," she breathed, "we're supposed to be recovering." "I can think of no better way to recover," he murmured against her neck, making the water around them begin to steam with their combined energy. Their child's presence receded tactfully to the back of their minds, leaving them to their private moment. The crystal walls of their chamber took on a rosy hue as their passion built, their intimate energy feeding back into the sacred power that suffused the temple. Hours later, as they lay entwined in their bed, Lethea traced the newly expanded markings on Cain's chest. "The patterns are still spreading," she observed. "Soon they'll cover you completely." "Like he asked, running his fingers over the intricate designs that now decorated most of her lavender skin. "The elders say it's unprecedented. A human accepting our sacred mark so completely, they're still trying to understand what it means." "I know exactly what it means," Cain replied, pulling her closer. "It means I belong here, with you and our impossibly powerful child, who's probably going to keep us on our toes for the next few centuries." Their child's consciousness surfaced briefly, projecting images of future mischief that made them both laugh. "At least life won't be boring," Lethea murmured, snuggling into his embrace. "It hasn't been boring since the moment you decided not to sacrifice me," he reminded her, pressing a kiss to her temple. The crystal walls pulsed softly with their contentment, their shared energy settling into a peaceful rhythm that spread throughout the temple, bringing sweet dreams to all who slept within its sacred halls. The temple's highest spire blazed with unprecedented light as Lethea went into labor. Cain held her hand, their shared energy pulsing in harmony with each contraction. The sacred markings that now covered both their bodies completely glowed with intensity that turned night into day. "The child comes with the dawn," Elder Amara announced, her aged hands steady as she prepared the birthing chamber. The walls of crystalline formations hummed with anticipation, responding to the imminent arrival of their prophesied offspring. "I can feel both your strengths," Lethea gasped, squeezing Cain's hand. "The baby, it's helping." Indeed, their child's consciousness had merged with theirs more fully than ever before, creating a three-way flow of power that suffused the entire temple with radiant energy. The new training techniques they'd developed over the past months, channeling excess power through their intimate bond, had prepared them for this moment. "Remember what we learned," Cain murmured against her temple, his free hand splayed across her belly. "Let the energy flow naturally like we practiced." Their child's presence rippled through their minds with approval, actively participating in its own birth by helping to direct the sacred energies in ways that eased Lethea's labor. The crystal formations around them began to pulse in rhythm with their combined heartbeats. "Extraordinary," Elder Moran breathed from his position near the chamber's entrance. "The prophecy spoke true. This child commands power even before drawing its first breath." The birth itself became a ceremony of unprecedented beauty. As dawn broke over the crystal city, their shared energy created aurora-like displays that danced across the sky. The entire tribe gathered in the temple's lower levels, their collective consciousness adding to the harmonious flow of power. When their daughter finally arrived, her first cry sent a wave of pure energy through the temple that caused every crystal formation to chime in perfect harmony. Her skin was a beautiful blend of her parents' tones, with intricate markings that seemed to shift and change like starlight on water. "She's perfect," Lethea whispered, tears of joy streaming down her face as she cradled their newborn. Cain couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. Through their bond, he shared his overwhelming love and wonder with both his mate and their daughter. The baby's consciousness reached back, projecting feelings of contentment and belonging that made the crystal walls pulse with soft light. "The marks," Elder Amar observed, pointing to the child's skin. "They're unlike anything in our records. See how they move?" Indeed, the sacred patterns on their daughter's skin flowed like liquid starlight, responding to her every emotion. When she opened her eyes, they held the same shifting patterns, as if she could see the very energy flows that powered their world. She bridges not just our peoples, Cain realized, but the very essence of sacred power itself. Months passed, and their daughter, whom they named Aurora, grew rapidly, displaying abilities that amazed even the most experienced elders. She could manipulate crystal formations instinctively, create energy shields without training, and communicate telepathically with an ease that made previous generations' abilities seem primitive in comparison. More importantly, her presence in the temple began changing the very nature of their society. The training methods Cain and Lethea had developed to handle excess energy through intimate connection evolved into a new school of sacred practice, one that emphasized the power of emotional bonds over rigid discipline. One evening, as they watched Aurora playing with small crystal formations, making them dance through the air like butterflies, Lethea turned to Cain with a mischievous smile. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd actually sacrificed you that day?" He pulled her close, their marked skin creating familiar patterns of light where they were touched. I think your goddess knew exactly what she was doing. Some sacrifices are meant to be failed." Their daughter looked up at them, her star-filled eyes twinkling with ancient wisdom and childish joy. Through their permanent three-way bond, she shared a vision of the future. Crystal cities spreading across the planet, humans and scavengers living in harmony, their combined strengths creating a civilization more magnificent than either could have achieved alone. "And to think," Cain murmured against Lethea's hair, "this all started because you had other plans for your sacrifice." "Best plans I ever made," she replied, turning in his arms as Aurora giggled, making the crystals around them chime in response. That night, as their daughter slept safely in her crystal cradle, Cain and Lethea celebrated their union as they had so many times before. Their intimate energy merged with the sacred power of the temple, creating a harmony that spread throughout the crystal city, blessing all who dwelt within its walls with dreams of a bright future. The prophecy had been fulfilled, but their story was far from over. It was in many ways just beginning, a new chapter in the eternal dance of sacred power and love, of sacrifice and salvation, of two worlds becoming one through the miracle of their union.